All right, in this final video, like I said, we're going to kind of go over the Clinton text for the week. But one thing that I wanted to note is that this is going to be a little bit of a review, but I think that you're going to come to actually a different kind of understanding than when we talked about it the first time. So the first thing that I wanted to just make sure to differentiate between is the difference between a Christian counselor and a counselor who's a Christian. I think we talked about this the very first week. So a Christian counselor is going to be a counselor that is primarily going to work in a church or a parachurch organization where their counseling services will be advertised as a part of the church or the parachurch organization, and so will be advertised as Christian counseling specifically. A Christian counselor, their primary methods of counseling and the interventions that they use are going to be a lot of the interventions that the Clinton text actually suggests and that we talked about this week. They're going to be primarily behavioral and cognitive behaviorally driven. They're going to be using the Bible as their foundation, and a lot of it is going to be totally just lost myself. We're going to be looking at spiritual principles, spiritual practices, looking at sin issues. It's not necessarily going to be a lot of digging into the family system, past those sorts of things. Of course, that does happen, but usually for most Christian counselors, we stay in the here and now. It's going to be a little bit like solution-focused brief therapy, where we're looking at changing behaviors and conforming to Christ. Okay, nothing bad with that at all. That's just the flavor of Christian counseling. If you are a counselor who is a Christian or advertise yourself as that, of course you're going to look more under that umbrella of all truth is God's truth. So of course, all of the interventions that were suggested in the Clinton text would definitely be applicable given the different clients that you're working with. But you would also have access to whatever is true, and you would bring that into the room: psychology, biology, economics, different religions, practices, those sorts of things. Whatever is true is what you can use. That's your worldview that you're operating from. So there's definitely a difference between a Christian counselor and a counselor who's a Christian. Now, I think I've already told most of you in a video actually, but to reiterate, I do not advertise myself as a Christian counselor. I actually don't even advertise myself as a counselor who is a Christian. I don't find that to be important, but that's just me. That's my own preference. So the reason that I don't do that is because I feel like if I were to say I was a Christian but not a Christian counselor, I don't know that it's necessarily something that needs to be brought up in the counseling process. Now, of course, if you're a Christian counselor and you're working and applying the Christian counseling techniques, it would be very appropriate to advertise yourself as a Christian counselor because this is the approach that you're coming from. But as I think I asked in the group discussion board, is it appropriate to identify yourself as a Christian systemic therapist or a Christian narrative therapist, just depending on the approach that you take? Or because I'm an eclectic therapist, do I have to advertise myself as a Christian eclectic therapist? And really the answer is no, you don't have to. If you advertise yourself as a Christian counselor, like I said, you're coming from a very specific set of values, set of interventions, approaches, and a very kind of cut and dry way of how you are going to be doing therapy. If you advertise yourself as a counselor who is a Christian, that is not necessarily something that you have to bring into the counseling session. Just like you wouldn't have to say, I'm a counselor who's a Buddhist or a counselor who's a Jew or a Hindu, or who practices agnosticism, or who is into New Age traditions and beliefs. That isn't necessarily something that has to be brought into the room. But remembering that if you advertise yourself as a counselor, you are coming from a very specific worldview, but it's that the interventions are not specifically the Christian counseling interventions. I hope I'm making sense there. So the biggest two questions that you need to ask yourself is, how are you going to advertise yourself? And make sure that you are doing it in a way that's ethically appropriate. So if you're advertising yourself as a counselor and you are only going to use Christian counseling interventions, that's not necessarily ethically appropriate because you are being misleading. Okay? You would need to let them know that you are a Christian counselor, and that is the approach that you take. Just like if I was an exclusively systemic therapist, I would let my clients know the first session that I'm a systemic therapist, and so this is how I approach the counseling sessions. Okay, so it's an appropriate way of identifying yourself. But if you're going to advertise yourself as a counselor, you need to, and you're only going to approach it from Christian counseling principles, you do need to let your client know, especially because they might have issues with that for themselves. They might not want to talk about spiritual issues, whatever it might be. So how are you going to advertise yourself, and how do you identify yourself? So again, I identify myself as an eclectic therapist, which means for me, I take into account all of the different traditions and theories and interventions that are out there. I bring those into the room. I figure out what's going to be the best fit for that client. And I view therapy as a very collaborative process. And so we tailor something that's specific to them, but that's also meaningful to them. If faith and spirituality and religion comes into it because the client decides that that's meaningful for them, I'm going to bring their standpoint into it and leave mine out as much as possible, because that is, for me, as I advertise myself as a counselor, that is what I feel is appropriate. Now, of course, I'm a Christian, but that is part of who I am on a personal level, but also, as a professional too. But I don't feel that it's important to necessarily advertise my faith within my profession. So hopefully I'm making sense there, and y'all are able to differentiate between that. So that's all we're going to talk about with that in our discussion this week. I do want to, of course, give you two resources. I apologize. I can't actually remember if I gave you this resource. That's terrible of me. I don't think I have, but if I have, you just need to hear about it again because it's my favorite. This is a book called The Book of Awakening by Mark Nepo. The little tagline here is "Having the Life You Want by Being Present to the Life You Have." I love this book so much that I have a copy here at my house and at my office. It is a meditative book. It is not necessarily a Christian book, but it is something that could easily be tailored into Christian counseling settings. And really what it is kind of just like a little daily reading and then a meditation. These are things that you can read to your clients. I read this every single morning to help me kind of just get grounded for the day. The meditations actually could be turned into prayers where you could kind of invite God into the process with you or the client or whoever is listening to this. So The Book of Awakening by Mark Nepo, or Nepo. Fabulous author. He is a philosopher and a poet. I actually think he is a believer. If you read his stuff, it becomes very apparent, but just does a wonderful job of kind of bringing us into that present moment. The second resource that I'm going to offer you is a magazine called Psychology Today, and this, of course, is something that you can subscribe to. You just go to the psychologytoday.com website, and you can order it. I believe they come out with this 6 to 8 times a year, and it's pretty reasonable, like $10 or $12. Or if you have a membership on Psychology Today, which is a public counseling directory or website, you automatically get this. But this is just full of kind of the latest, up-to-date different theories and interventions and issues that are kind of going on in our culture. It's a very, very interesting read. It's filled with tons of resources. So Psychology Today is a great magazine. When I'm done with these, I leave them in my waiting room so my clients can read them too. Just kind of a wonderful little tool to have. So those are the resources for the week. And then, of course, we are moving on to week 8. So kind of round of applause. Give yourselves a pat on the back. We are into the second half of the course, and so this is good. And as usual, of course, there are no new assignments in terms of the content. We will have a case study that we'll be reading this week, and of course, you'll be discussing that on the group discussion board. Portfolio of competence, journal, your evaluations and counseling sessions, but that's all old hat to y'all now. And so I'm excited to continue to interact with you on the group discussion board, and you'll have a great day.